And that was a big part of what I'm trying to get across to the audience is you like 70% of the work is in the draft, and then you kind of have to manage from there. But the draft is really important. You can make or break your season with the draft. So the first couple of videos were just like draft strategy tips and trying to just go over some of the things that people make mistakes on. And even some of the bigger like fantasy channels out there, they make a lot of mistakes just in terms of like roster construction. So I wanted to go through what happened in my league and like some of the tips and tricks that I've used, and then show how certain things work out, whether you do no goalie strategy or pick a goalie first or whatever. There's a lot of stuff that went into like just looking back at my own league and trying to help tweak so that we can find a better draft strategy together and then move forward. And then it's just kind of built from there.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And like the reason and I'm actually super glad that you brought up the draft, by the way, because the reason I stumbled across your account was because I find that there's a ton of resources out there for helping you with the draft in fantasy hockey. And me, for example, I use a bunch of different mostly free advanced analytics sites. Money Puck is a great go-to. Dauber Sports for everything is great. But I find after the draft, there's not a lot of content and not a lot of resources out there to kind of help you on a weekly basis. So that is why I stumbled across your account and found it super helpful. So I'm glad that you really focused on that. And I was wondering then, focusing on your sort of weekly videos and weekly pickups and things like that, what are some of the key areas that you think, typical fantasy managers should be aware of when it comes to weekly moves? Like, what are some things that are on the top of your mind as someone who makes fantasy content on a weekly basis?
Well, one of the mistakes that I see is that, and anybody out there, there's a lot of like big name YouTubers and fantasy players out there that they're just looking at hot streaks and like they're just going to look at this guy's done this over the last stretch or whatever. And you can do things that way. There's definitely like value in riding a hot streak, especially if nothing's changed. So for example, right now, Philip Hedl is on a massive hot streak, but he's playing with that kid line. So that's going to continue. As long as they keep that line together, that can continue, but not every hot streak is the same. So what I was trying to do is two things. Basically, one, you should, after your draft, you should leave 1 or 2 spots on your roster for weekly streams, just so that you have some flexibility to manage the schedule. Sometimes your star players are only going to be playing twice in a week, so you need to kind of account for that with your weekly waiver ads. So when you think about picking guys up, it's usually for me about roster maximization. So finding guys that are playing on the light nights that you can then add to your roster, because on the heavy nights, you have to make some decisions as to what, who's going to get in your lineup and whatnot. So for me, I like to, especially in the weekly videos, just highlight the players that are playing on the off nights, and then look at some players that are trending in the right direction on some hot streaks. But I did a feature for a couple months, and it got to be repetitive because it was like the names weren't changing. But I was also looking at goals above it and below expected. So you'd look at the goals below expected and see who's getting chances but not cashing in yet, and then some of those guys would break out and start to score. That happened with Matt Barzal not too long ago. And I think it was December. He was getting a ton of chances and he had like no goals on the season. He finally broke out a little bit. But basically just roster maximization, and then trying to, if you're in a categories league and you're light on hits or blocks or whatever, I try to highlight guys that'll fill that specific role. If you're in a league without hits and blocks, but you need power play goals or something, sometimes I try to, filter in some advice that's tailored towards points leagues that have waiting for goals and power play points and things like that. But really, I mean, the number one thing to keep in mind, and it's difficult as a fantasy YouTuber because everybody plays in a different league format. So I have a couple different leagues I'm in, points leagues, category leagues, but people come and ask me, this player or that player, and it's like, well, I need to know what kind of league format you're in, how many teams, that kind of thing. And that could make or break, do I pick up, Carter Verhaeghe right now? Well, yeah, he's hot, but, if you're not getting extra waiting for shots or goals or whatever, it may not be the best pickup. So just try to, maximize your roster with the off nights, look for hot streaks and cold streaks, and then, just trying to maximize your fantasy format and use that to your advantage.
Yeah, that's great. All of that very, very relevant. And games played, I think, are truly king. So I'm glad that you highlight, who's playing on the off nights, who's on hot streaks on those teams, who's still available. I know you do your percentage owned when you talk about players. So that's always helpful to have in the back of your mind too.